Hello there. Welcome to another edition of the Inrus Files. Thoughts on culture and the human condition from a very specific Generation X point of view. I've been thinking about this topic for quite a long time. I've been a writer for a long time and have been constantly exposed to this idea that if you write fast, you write poorly. And in order to really craft high quality material that will stand the test of time, you need to painstakingly go over it and over it and over it. You need to be able to write your rough draft, then a polished first draft, then a much more polished second draft. This has always been the idea that has been impressed upon me. And then you get exposed. When I was in high school, Stephen King was producing at least one novel a year, sometimes two novels a year, and eventually it was discovered that he had been writing under a pen name as well. And if you added in the pen name, he was publishing two or three novels a year. And then in addition to the novels, he was just pumping out short stories like nobody's business. And a lot of people seem to poo-poo Stephen King as he's just another horror writer, and sort of dismissed him as a writer of pulp fiction, even though the days of pulp fiction had already passed. So it's a topic I've been thinking a lot about, and I've decided that it's time to really address it because it fits in with the whole if you want to get good at something, you do have to put in your reps. I often deferred I keep falling to the example of Yo-Yo Ma because I used to play cello. Yo-Yo Ma, there's a fellow who could play cello. Practicing, practicing, practicing is what made him as good as he is. Of course, you don't get to hear all of the hours of practice that he puts into the concerts that he finally performs. And arguably, the concert that he performs is supposed to be where he really shines. However, uh, in order to generate the gems, sometimes being prolific is the way you do it. And one of the points that I kind of want to get at today is that the answer is more complicated than just you have to do it this way or you have to do it that way. So, as always, I'm going to try to tell stories to illustrate my points, but my points today are more about storytelling than they are about uh, uh, full, complete stories in and of themselves. And the stories in my case have to do with where I was when I learned these lessons. Um, and if you, I think the biggest shock came to me when I was taking a writer's masterclass that was being taught by two well-known science fiction authors, Dean Wesley Smith and Christine Catherine Rush, who were also both prolific editors. They had been magazine editors, both of Pulp House magazine, which published a lot of fiction. And then Christine Catherine Rush was also editor of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction for a number of years. Both of them have published both under their own names and other names as well, and they have won multiple awards in multiple genres. Christine Catherine Rush has published romance, a very successful series of books in romance, very successful series of books in what you would call crime and mystery. The Smokey Dalton books, highly recommended, great stuff. And they taught this workshop, and one of the first myths that they wanted to dispel is this idea that the way you get to quality is by polishing, 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 as opposed to practice, send it out, practice, send it out. And he brought up the classic example, and I say it's the classic example because I think it's one of those when you hear it, you instantly recognize it because you already know the names. Who are some of the best writers that we think of when somebody talks about just excellent writing? Who leaps to mind? And one of the most obvious answers is Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens, who is known for several amazing novels, several of which are taught in high schools. A Tale of Two Cities, Great Expectations, A Christmas Carol. These are stories that have reverberated throughout the English speaking world. They have influenced so many other works. And if you've ever read even just the introduction to A Tale of Two Cities, it is it is a marvel. It's 3 pages long and it feels like it's uh, kind of like, yeah, you're belaboring the point, but when he really ties it all together in the very last line, you can appreciate everything that was set up. Uh, it really is excellent writing. Charles Dickens was paid by the word. Charles Dickens published 15 major novels, 46 short stories, on his own, and those are the ones I counted in Wikipedia. But then he also published his at least as many, and I think more short stories that he did as collaborative works with other people. Again, oh, and he was a newspaper man, so he was already writing a lot anyway. But my point is that a lot of his stuff stood the test of time because it is excellent, but he was writing to deadline and he was getting paid by the word. So he had incentive to be loquacious. And that has been remembered and it has been rewarded by continuing to stay in print all of these years and by using his name, holding his name up as an example of amazing literature. Uh, so several other examples that leap to mind in terms of you've heard of H.G. Wells. He had 93 major published works. I shouldn't say major published works. He had 93 published works throughout his career, some of which were fiction, some of which were nonfiction, some of which were novels, some were short stories. But uh, as a result, he is remembered for a lot of his contributions to science fiction as well as politics. His writing on politics, very well known and very highly regarded. And in a lot of ways, you could look at his writing as political science fiction. I contend Stephen King is going to be remembered, and Stephen King is going to be taught in the schools. I know he is already being taught in some schools, and I expect that to be more ubiquitous as time goes on. Stephen King is still writing, or at least he's still publishing. I know he's got another new novel coming out soon that is being credited to him and Peter Straub because it continues a storyline that the two of them worked out together. But Stephen King has published 67 novels and over 200 short stories. And I contend a lot of those really are quality works. He has received many awards for his writing and not just in genre fiction. I think what was it, the O. Henry Award that I think was one of the literary awards that he has won. And there have been some others as well. Again, I contend he will be remembered. His writing is good. Now, people may agree or disagree on which of his novels have excellent writing. Arguably, he's an amazing storyteller. If you want to tell good stories and if you want to tell stories well, you have to put in your reps. That said, as I mentioned before, it's not as simple as, well, if you do a lot of quantity, that's how you get to quality. It is a way to get to quality. Um, oh, I also you know what? I wanted to mention a couple of other, writers before I go into this. People who have written a lot, and a lot of their writing was very, very good. Ray Bradbury, 50 books, over 600 short stories. Now I can tell you not all 600 hit it out of the park, but pick up any of his short story collections, and you will see a master storyteller. Um, Joseph Heller wrote, what was it? I think he wrote a dozen novels. He's most remembered for one of the best satires written in the 20th century, and that's Catch 22. A book that was so good, a satire that was so good that it actually contributed a phrase to the English language, to the English lexicon. Catch 22 was his made up name for a concept that he had in the book that up until that point had never had a name. But now these days, when you talk about somebody being caught in a catch 22, you know what it means because of that novel. That novel was one of a dozen. I've read another one of his novels, God Knows, which is fantastic. He's also well known for another novel called Something Happened. But while all of his novels, I think, are generally well regarded, he is an example of somebody who produced a lot of quantity in order to get to the high quality. That said, there are several examples of what you would call one-hit wonders in the literary world who actually did take the time to write their work and then, polish and polish and polish until they got it absolutely the way they wanted it to. Um, One example is J.D. Salinger, who's best known for Catcher in the Rye. He did write 2 other novels, I think, and he is also known for, some short stories. Actually, he wrote 2 other books, one of which is 9 stories. Um, he worked in newspapers, so do you count him? I think you do, because he was a very meticulous writer, who spent a great deal of time on his craft, and yet did not have prolific output. Emily Bronte. By the way, I'm well aware that a lot of the names I've mentioned so far, up until this point, have all been men, and this is the fault of how the canon has developed over time. Although the the Bronte sisters are well known. Emily Bronte only published one novel, Wuthering Heights, very well remembered, and this is the novel that she spent a great deal of her time on and then didn't write anything else, and yet that novel has stood the test of time. Sylvia Plath was a multiply published poet, very well known for her poetry, and had only completed one novel that we're certain of, and it was published. It's called The Bell Jar, and this is somebody who didn't make a career of being a prolific novelist. She was a prolific poet, but nonetheless, her novel, The Bell Jar, is held up as an example of just being exemplary writing, just high quality writing. Ralph Ellison wrote Invisible Man. Now, Ralph Ellison, again, famous for writing a lot of essays and short stories, but only one or two novels, and the one Invisible Man is a classic. I'm going to mention one other writer. A lot of the stories that I've mentioned so far, a lot of these books, um, the the ones that have published a lot, we think of as kind of genre fiction. I mean, even though Charles Dickens is thought of today as literary, it's a very specific kind of genre of literary. Um, but sometimes, especially with the authors who are known for having crafted one uniquely awesome work, Their works resonate because they also capture the zeitgeist of the time that they are written. And there are 2 authors in particular I wanna mention with regard to this. One is Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote a novel and then a play based on the novel called Uncle Tom's Cabin. I haven't read the novel. I've read the play, and the story is so compelling. I don't think it's assigned in high schools much anymore. I know it is referenced in schools. I read it when I was in college, and I was a history major, and I realized that may have influenced the fact that I read it. But, but it is a very, very powerful story. It is unfortunate that it has come to be known for setting a stereotype that actually doesn't exist in the book. So I recommend reading it if you haven't already. And then the other one, which I think is the granddaddy of them all when it comes to stories that were polished, polished, polished until they were absolutely right before they were presented to the world. And that is Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. I think she went through 4 entire rewrites of the novel. One of the earlier versions of the novels was published after she died, and that was called To Set a Watchman, and you can tell why To Kill a Mockingbird became the culmination of all of her efforts. It is just a vastly superior work. Now, Harper Lee was also somebody who wrote, for newspapers. I think I'm remembering her bio correctly. So, yes, she did practice writing, but when it came to her novel, it was something that she crafted and crafted and crafted and then produced great work. So it can be done. And one of the other things about the the tussle between quality and quantity is that uh, quantity doesn't guarantee quality. Quantity is a way to get to quality. However, in order to get there, just like putting in your reps for anything, it has to be deliberate practice. It has to be something where you are trying to get better every step of the way. I realize I'm doing a little more lecturing this time around than I usually do. So I hope you'll bear with me. However, I love to talk about stories, and these stories written by these people are just fantastic, amazing stuff to read. And uh, it's I think it's a testament uh, to all of them that they found different paths to writing high quality material. And so uh, I wanted to touch upon not only the literature, though, but this is something that we see in all forms of storytelling. I wanted to bring this up in connection. By the way, you'll occasionally see me looking down because I did make a few notes just before I went live today. Um, Look at music. Who do we remember today as being amazing composers, for example? And I do contend that music is absolutely, when it is done well, tells a story. When it comes to the greats, you think of Ludwig van Beethoven, you think of Johann Sebastian Bach, you think of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Um, these people all produced so many works, and all of it is good. Some of it is amazing. You do have some composers whose works persist, but only, 1 or 2 pieces, that they're known for. Um, but but the ones who really stand the test of time tend to be the ones who produced a lot. And I will also contend that this is something we see in music, in more modern terms. We do talk about the idea of the one-hit wonder, somebody who, a band or a performer who managed to put together just exactly the right combination of everything, the lyrics and the music and the sound, and but only had one effort that actually caught with the public, and then the rest didn't quite capture the magic. Um, but then you have acts like the Beatles. And I had to look up the numbers here. They produced in the 9 years that they were recording 213 songs. And that was from 1962 to 1970. It included 188 original compositions and 25 covers. They averaged more than 23 songs per year, making them one of the most prolific bands in music history. Their success was unmatched with 14 albums in the space of 9 years. They had 18 top 10 hits and 20 number one singles. Um, they were, for the longest time, the absolute reigning champions of having number one hits. And every once in a while, a new Elvis song would be found and polished and released, and then, oh, Elvis has had more number one hits. Then another Beatles song would be found and polished and released, and then, oh, now the Beatles have more number one hits. I think since then, they have been eclipsed. I can't remember if Michael Jackson was uh, the first modern performer. I say modern, but later 20th century, early 21st century performers uh, to finally conquer that number. And in large part, these are performers who have also had very, very long careers. Taylor Swift, I think, might be on that list. Beyonce might be on that list. I'm not sure. But in addition to those 188 original songs that they composed for themselves, the Beatles also wrote songs for a number of other bands. Badfinger, and that's one that comes to mind. What's another one? You know what? I'm blanking on it right now, but it is. There are a handful of songs that you would recognize from that era, if you're at all familiar with any of the songs from that era, that they wrote. Either Paul McCartney or John Lennon or both co-wrote them, and I think George Harrison had written one or two for other bands as well. Uh, and yeah, we are familiar with the idea of the one-hit wonders. They do exist, but the Beatles' output was, up until that time, really something that had not been seen, and for something to go as long as it did, as hard as it did, and you can hear amazing strength right from their very first album. Um, let's talk about plays, another form of storytelling. I did mention Harriet Beecher Stowe, but and I mentioned her in the context of the what we would call a one-hit wonder, but who do we think of as one of the best playwrights ever in any language, but in particular in the English language? We think of William Shakespeare. He wrote 39 plays. 39 plays. Now, I'm sure not all 39 were absolutely top tier, but enough of them are top tier that you could anybody who's gone to any high school in North America and Britain has read at least one or two Shakespeare's plays, and I think actually most people will have read four or more when you really get right down to it. Maybe I should say four instead of four or more. Um, but but other playwrights that you think of tend to be playwrights who have written a lot. Arthur Miller, he's very well known in particular for two plays, Death of a Salesman and The Crucible, both of which are very, very pointed critiques of a modern American society. But yeah, he wrote many, many plays. Musicals. You think of storytellers like Neil Simon, Rodgers and Hart, Rodgers and Hammerstein, Stephen Sondheim. Think of storytellers in the movies: Steven Spielberg, Ridley Scott, George Lucas, Alfred Hitchcock. But you will also recognize the names of some other movie directors, even if you haven't seen their films, like Fellini or Eisenstein. These are people who made a lot of movies, and those movies were very influential on people in the business, not people in the business, people in the art that followed. Um, in comic books, which is another amazing form of storytelling, we will remember decades from now the impact of Frank Miller and Alan Moore on the comics. Very, very prolific writers in the comics. Okay, now that I have hit that souffle with a sledgehammer, if you are going to write prolifically, or if you are going to write and you want to improve as a writer, I think there are two things that are worth keeping in mind. Um, One of them is Robert A. Heinlein's rules for writing, and again, this is something that Dean Wesley Smith covers in. He actually wrote a book about this, a book or booklet, but it is something that he does go over in his workshops. I had already been aware of it because I'm an avid fan of Robert A. Heinlein. He first published his 5 rules for writing, I think, in 1947. And again, I have them written down here to make sure I get them right. Rule number 1, you must write. Rule number 2, you must finish what you start. Rule number 3, you must refrain from rewriting except to editorial request. I don't know if it was Heinlein or if it was somebody else. I think it was Heinlein, though, who very famously was asked to make some changes to a story, and his response was, um, I'm sending this back to you with a few, the main changes made that you have requested. If you would like any more changes, please be sure to sign your request on the back of a check. Uh, his 4th rule for writing is, after you have written it, right? Write, you must finish what you start, refrain from rewriting unless an editor requests it. Once you've written it, put it on the market. You got to send it out to the editors. One of the things that keeps getting driven home to me is I'm the worst judge of my own work. If I write it and it's a complete story, somebody out there has the taste for that style of story, and the only way it's going to find that reader is if I send it out. These days, self-publishing is a lot easier than it has been in previous days. And I will note, even in previous days, self-publishing is a totally respectable way to get your stories out there. Mark Twain, very famously self-published. Richard Nixon. Now, granted, Richard Nixon is not normally thought of as a writer, but he wrote several books on politics after he had resigned as president of the United States, and they are highly regarded books. But he self-published them. Maybe I shouldn't mention Richard Nixon if I'm talking about how respectable self-publishing is. So maybe we'll edit that out in post-production. And Heinlein's 5th rule is, you have to keep the story out there until it gets published. As in, if somebody rejects it, you send it back out again. Again, in the era of self-publishing, that has a slightly different connotation. I have found that if I send my stories out and then I have an editor say, "Yep, this is good. I'm willing to buy this." Do that a few times, get a sense of what that editor likes. I have a lot more confidence then in publishing more stories like that on my own. So there is something to be said for getting the validation of somebody out there who is known for their taste in your particular field of writing. But keep submitting it until you find somebody who actually can give you that feedback. One of the other things, though, about writing often, storytelling frequently, is how you get feedback. How do you know how to write better? One way, of course, is to read and read good stuff as often as you can. But the other thing is to have other readers read your work while it is in progress or after the first draft phase and take their critiques, decide with that whether you're going to do some touch up to your work before you send it out. But I wanted to talk for a minute about how people give their feedback, because a lot of people think that what happens is if you're an early if you're reading an early version of my story and there are things about it that you don't like, which is inevitable, um, you can tell me or tell the writer that there are things that don't work for you, but there seems to be this compulsion of saying this is how you should fix it, or this is one way you could fix it, and that's not as helpful. It's up to the writer to figure out how to fix it, because the writer knows all of the other aspects of the story that will be affected by the changes that you have in mind. The best kind of critique that I have discovered, that has worked for me, and I think I first learned about this style of critique from a teacher who was teaching at the University of Washington. She was teaching a commercial fiction writing class, and her name was Pam Goodfellow. And what she said about critique is, you as the reader, your job is to tell the writer what you got out of the experience, what you felt about the characters, what what the writing did for you, and that's it. I felt like this character was very brave. I felt like this character was very cowardly. I really liked this character. This character rubbed me the wrong way. This situation didn't ring true for me because I would have expected this or that, or that kind of thing. But you don't talk about how to fix it. You just talk about what you, as the reader, experienced. This was also very, very well practiced at the writing workshop called Clarion West. And if you, by the way, if you're an aspiring writer or if you are a writer who's working on building up your craft, I highly recommend the Clarion West Writers Workshop. I know that their method of critique has evolved a little bit over time since I attended, but again, the idea of the critique is not to tell the writer how to write; it's to tell the writer how they affected you as the reader so that they know whether they hit the mark. And if you say, "Oh man, I really loved this one character," and you're like, "Yeah, I didn't want you to love this character. Now I have to decide, do I want you to still love this character or do I want you to not love this character the way I had originally intended?" Um Two other things about writing critique that I will mention. One is you can do critique in written form, and this is how most writing critique groups work, is through written form. But Pam Goodfellow's approach was, she suggested that you get together as a group and read one scene. You go around and each writer reads one scene out loud. Reading your work out loud brings it to it brings it through different processes, different processing centers of your brain and the brains of everybody who's hearing it. Um, Very different from seeing it on the page. And the other thing that she recommended that I found really helpful is writing longhand instead of typing. Writing longhand really causes you to think about your word choice, and everything like that, and you don't, uh you would think that if you're writing longhand, that means you're gonna write fewer words because it's tiring and it's slower than it is to just type. But actually, what I have found is not that I write fewer words, but that my words do more heavy lifting as a whole, that, I might write just as many words, but they are tighter. They're more compact. There's a lot more, happening in each of those sentences because, yeah, my my hand is telling my brain, "You better make this worth it." So, the first novel that I had written, I think 2/3 of it were handwritten, and a third of it was typed, and I love the typed parts just fine, but the handwritten parts just have a little more of a feel to them. They're a little more sensory in the description. Something to try when you're writing. I wanna wrap up with one last idea about quantity versus quality. And I bring it up because I keep hearing people talk about, well, you know, this person's spitting out a story every week. There's no way that you can keep up that sort of quality over time. Um, if you're working that fast. There's a famous example. I know it was recently discussed in the book Atomic Habits. I'd first heard about this before Atomic Habits had come out. There was a study, and I've got the name of the professor here. Where's the name here? Bop-de-bop-bop-ba. It was conducted by Jerry Yulesman, a professor at the University of Florida. And what he had done, he was teaching photography. He took his class and he divided them up in half, and he said, "All right, this half of the class, I want you to take the perfect shot. You will get an A in the class as long as the shot you take is as close to perfect as possible. And this half of the class, I want you to take lots of shots, and then I want you to submit your best work." And again, what we're looking for is as close to perfect as possible. When all was said and done, the people who had taken lots and lots and lots of shots, they experimented. They learned what worked and what didn't. And even though there were a lot of shots that ultimately weren't used, when each one submitted what they considered to be their best shot, they almost always came in as, "Yep, that is an A grade photo." The half of the class that was working on coming up with the perfect shot, they had produced essentially mediocre work. They had discussed a lot of theory about how to stage the shot and how to do the lighting and all of this, but they didn't take that many pictures in order to get their final shot. And then their final shot was good in theory, but it was not as close to the A level work as the people who had taken a lot of shots. And I want to make one last point. Uh, I had gone to target practice on one occasion with my father, and say what you will about weapons and all the rest of that. He thought it was very important that we understand how weapons work. And actually, as a writer, I'm very, very glad that I understand how weapons work, how they feel, how they are handled when they are handled safely. And then that also means you recognize how they are handled when they are not handled safely. We'd gone to a range that was a pistol range. It was an indoor pistol range, like you see in the movies where the cops are doing their practicing in the firing ranges. And I had a pistol that my father had loaded, and he had shown me how to do this, that, and the other, and I had a target way down in the lane, and I was to fire at the target 5 times. And he said, "Okay, you have 30 seconds to get off these 5 shots." And so I lined up the sights just exactly right, and then I made sure I had it, and then I slowly squeezed the trigger until I had fired all 5 rounds. And I said, "Okay, and now we're gonna do another 5 rounds, and this time you have 10 seconds to get all 5 rounds off." Ooh, that's something different entirely. So it was like, line it up, pull, line it up, pull, line it up, pull. Then we looked at the 2 different groupings. He already knew what we were gonna see, and he was absolutely right. The one where I had less time, I had a very, very tight group of holes in the target. The one where I was taking my time between each shot, making sure I had everything lined up and perfect, it was scattered all over. Um, at least I was good enough to hit the paper, I suppose, but, sometimes you need to work quickly when it comes to storytelling. You need to work quickly to in order to escape the editor who wants to slow you down and say, "No, no, no, wait, we gotta make sure this is perfect." And if you are able to get past your internal editor and get that story out there, you already have the instincts for how to use your words, how to convey the story that you want to convey. You just have to get out of your own way. So, quantity versus quality, I think that more often than not, the path to quality is achieved by going through quantity. And there's no reason that some of your work while you are doing that can't be viewed as you go. So there's my food for thought for you for today, and I hope you found that interesting. And we'll see you again next time. Take care.